That was fun. How you doing, buddy?
Good to see you.
I'm good. Are you the audio is being super weird here.
What's it doing?
Yeah, I think some of them enabled Halloween mode.
Heck.
Hold on.
You have some echoes going.
What was that?
Is that on your side?
Yeah, so does your audio sound very, very weird to you, like what you're hearing here? Or is this just me?
No, I'm okay here. Can you describe?
All right, hold on.
I'm gonna quit.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe let's Scott does sound like a director.
It's all part of the.
We can hop off and try. All right.
All right.
All right, so if I'm here, do I sound bad? Anybody who's still around? This sounds normal. I think it was Scott's fault. Thanks. Good. I'm blaming Scott. Yeah. Oh boy. Let's see what he's doing here. All right, he's back. Let's see if Scott's audio still gets all deranged on us.
Hello.
That is so much better.
Oh, wow. All right.
Great.
That's
Yeah,
good to hear.
so I think I've mentioned to you before, and this was, I mean, it was dangerously close here again. I just about lost it. But when I was in like school and high school and stuff, in fact, I did tell you this. I used to have these giggle fits, right? Where I just find something funny and I just would not be able to stop laughing for literally minutes. I had a whole thing with my college professor where we went to go check a project one time. And for whatever reason, I just started laughing in his office when we were trying to get help from him. And he was looking at me like I was just like, what was wrong with me? My coding partner was like giving me the dirty look, like, what are you doing? And I had to excuse myself from the room. I couldn't stop laughing. I was that close to it with the deranged robot thing going on.
Man, I'm gonna have to tune into this show for the first time and see how I sounded.
Yeah, no, it was so you didn't hear it at all.
No, I sounded to me great. I sounded great.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, you'll have to check it out. Anyway, that was a great start. That was exciting.
Yeah. How you doing?
Not too bad. How about you?
Doing well. Happy almost Halloween.
Yeah, no, I think actually when you go back and watch the thing, we should have just played this off as a Halloween like thing, because it was par for the course. It worked for that. Yeah.
I do have a hat.
Nice. Yeah, I wasn't sure. It looks good. It looks good. I wasn't sure what to expect, honestly, from you on this stream, because I know that like we had the request, I believe, what was it, yesterday? You got the new wetsuit, and I know I saw the request on Twitter to have you pop on the stream like this. Actually, yeah. I think they requested that I get one too, which is maybe why we didn't do it. But
yeah, well, it also takes me about 37 minutes to put that suit on. and I didn't see that request until just now. So sorry.
Fair. Yeah, selective viewing of the request. Yeah. Oh, good. Awesome. Yeah, no, so it's yeah, so and like this has been there's been some cool stuff happening like perf-wise the last couple weeks, right?
Some
Like this
browser
week,
releases,
say that again.
yeah, some browser updates as well.
Yeah, like what Safari, right? Kind of had the tech preview launch release, I
Yeah,
think.
I saw that yesterday. That looked pretty exciting. Not so much on the performance front necessarily, but dialogue element updates. I think that would end up coming back to potentially being a performance improvement, just with all the dialogue JavaScript no longer being needed.
Polyfills out there, right? For
Yeah,
this kind of
yeah,
stuff.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and anytime you can remove a couple polyfills is good. Yeah.
Yeah, and one I was thinking of in particular, because I worked on a dialogue web component last year, inert, and needing to use the inert attribute, which at least I haven't checked recently, but I don't think it's quite settled in every browser yet. That polyfill was pretty expensive, because it has to basically touch all of the non-dialogue elements in the DOM. So it'll be nice. It'll be nice to see a native implementation of that. I haven't tested it yet, but that was cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. What else did
That
you
should be
see?
good. Well, there was the whole I mean, so that's always good. There was the whole WordPress thing too, where they did
Like a
basically the
performance
WordPress
team?
core team. Yeah, the WordPress core team kind of put out this proposal to build up a performance team, like for improving the performance of WordPress core, which is cool. Like WordPress, is open source. You've got the team. I mean, you did jQuery and all that stuff. But like for the folks who are kind of tuning in, like you've got the core team that kind of contributes back to the core functionality. And I liked they had this whole proposal for a performance team and why and stuff like that. And yeah, I think what was cool about this for me is like it's a trend to some extent. I think
A lot of teams starting to build performance into their workflows and into their tooling too, I guess.
yeah, and they mention a few here. Like they mentioned comparing to other platforms, right? Like using the HTTP archives report. They mentioned comparing themselves to Wix, who has been very vocal on Twitter and stuff about how they're doing in HTTP archive data. Shopify, which has their own speed score. Vercel yesterday at their event announced some performance checks. Like it's like a thing now where platforms are trying to find ways to have these performant defaults and also sort of encourage the folks using those platforms and giving them the information and the tools to like build really performant experiences. And
yeah, I
I
think
can get behind that.
Netlify comes to mind as well as one that's always
yeah,
just,
absolutely,
right, performance first. Yeah,
which is awesome. I dig that. I think that's like, I mean, there was a whole conversation about this for a few years now where this idea that like if you really wanted to shift performance or accessibility or security or anything like that on the web, there's the part of it where you kind of go after the individual developers and do your, that's important, the education and advocacy that way. But to really make like big shifts, especially when you're talking about that like long tail of the web, requires really that the platforms and the tools themselves are doing things to get better. So
yep, absolutely. Yeah, so that was exciting to see.
I like that.
Yeah.
And then this week was TPAC as well going on.
TPAC, yep.
Yeah. So TPAC is all. What's that?
I was going to say I have not caught up on the events. Anything perf related that came out of that?
Yeah, so TPAC is like the W3C groups, like all the working groups. So there's actually the web perf working group every day for like in fact, they're doing it right now. Every day for a few hours have been getting together and, having these conversations. And it's kind of fun because it's like, I mean, it's a mix. Like some of it is pretty heavy. Like you're getting it's a lot of browser vendors and standards people talking about like, what are those next standards and stuff like that. But particularly during this week, what they're also doing is they're bringing in, they have people from different companies that are talking about, like they had a whole session about RUM, like where does RUM fall short? Like when RUM is really hard, real user monitoring, some of those metrics are really hard to attribute to like what actually triggered the event, or, you know, it gets some sort of attribution and like things like that that are complicated. Or there was a talk from somebody at Microsoft Excel about how they're using the new event timing API to try and measure responsiveness inside their app, because it's, you know, a single complex, you know, SPA.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, or things like, you know, some new APIs, like there's the whole JavaScript self-profiling API, which sounds pretty cool. You know, different levels of compression. There's just a lot of really interesting stuff that comes out of it. And it is interesting, and apparently goats, from the looks of it here. Yoav is involved. For anybody who doesn't know Yoav, he does have goats. But it's interesting because you get a really interesting blend between, you know, again, like the talks from the specific companies on how they're doing something or trying to measure something. But you also get folks who are doing like deep dive in the weeds browser stuff. So I'll be honest, like sometimes I just kind of sit there and I'm like, when they're talking about, well, if we were going to implement this inside the browser, it means we'd have to do X and Y. And I'm like, all of that's just flying over the head. But it's just, yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff still that comes up.
Yeah. I mean, there are just so many facets of web development that, you know, it's impossible to be on top of all of them. But yeah, it's great to see these notes. This is some interesting stuff.
Yeah, and so we can share the doc for this, but I would say that I guess it's going to be a really long link, isn't it? That might not be super helpful. Yeah, it's not going to be helpful. But you know, basically,
I'll type that in.
Yeah, we'll type it into the comments here. But all of these things will also link off to the presentations. Like the videos were recorded for each of the talks. The only thing they don't record are the actual Q&A part after, because they want the companies and the people involved to feel comfortable like getting into the weeds without you know, saying something that maybe they're going to regret later on. So
got it.
Yeah. So there's some cool
Very
stuff popping up.
Yeah. Also in perf news, our team got together in person, or a lot of our team anyway.
No, that was good. It was good news.
Yeah.
Actually,
it was really nice.
Found there was Gina posted a picture of that, which I thought was cool. Like there's the core, there's the group, there's the team right there.
Yeah, in the same place on a rooftop.
Amazing.
In New York City.
Yeah. Yes. No, it was fun. It was like, I think that's the first time. I mean, I'd met you before. That's the first time I've been anybody. Like I've been working with these amazing people for, you know, what is it, like 10 months, 11 months now for some of them. And like, finally getting to hang out in person was incredible.
It's a very good thing. Yeah. And there's Jeff Lembeck, actually, who joined like 3 weeks ago.
There's Jeff.
Coming up on a month now. Yeah.
I think it's about a month. Yeah, just about a month, just under maybe. Yeah. No, it's a rock solid. I mean, the team's been awesome, and it was fun. Like, I don't want to say too much, but we there's some cool stuff I think that we came up with while we were there.
Yeah, I think there's an exciting roadmap ahead for WebPageTest.
Yeah, so stay tuned. I'm particularly excited about Redacted. So
yeah. Is that the new framework?
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah, the new WebPageTest React-driven model. Yeah. Oh, we are excited too, for what it's worth. Like Jeff, I don't even know if Jeff is watching this, but he's fantastic. Like,
commits landing right from the start.
Exactly. Yeah. And he's like doing things like actually testing, like putting unit tests and stuff in our code base. What is that? It's weird. It's nice.
Yep.
Cool.
Really good to see. Yeah. So what else do we have here?
Yeah. So I thought like today we'd go, like, it's been a while since we did just like picked a site, did a like, I mean, in fact, I don't know that we've done it since you would kind of come on the team, but like early on, we'd like pick a site and just kind of walk through. And I thought we'd do that today.
I like that idea.
And there's a couple things I think that we can kind of show along the way, but I wanted to do, I'm not sure if you're familiar, because you like to run, right? Or,
I do like to run. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So then
picked a running site.
I did. It is running. Yeah. Hold on here. Let's see. Are you familiar with Enda at all?
Enda.
Yeah.
I think it's new to me. Looks
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah. So this was, I put out there on Twitter, this was months ago. And I was like at the point where like the shoes that I was using to run were like chunks of the bottom were falling off. And it's like, so I put out on Twitter, like, oh, what kind of stuff should I, you know, what type of
Okay.
shoes do people like? And one of the folks came back with this company, which I had never heard of either, but it's really cool.
Hmm.
They are based out of Kenya. Um, they, I guess, started with like a crowdfunding campaign to make the first one out of like that they produced. It got
Okay.
really,
Yeah.
really popular. Um, and it's cool. Like it's, all out of there, like made in Kenya. Um, they take their running very seriously. They take like the responsibility as like a company very seriously. You can see this notes here around like what they do around climate neutral and all that kind of stuff. There's just a lot, I
Nice.
think, that Enda does that's really neat. And
Yeah,
like
this
I
is
said, the
great.
shoes have been really well reviewed. Like
Interesting, because I
they're
am in
kind
the
of cool.
market. I'm at that stage with my running shoes right now with the
Yeah. Well,
I don't know how
so
many 100 miles is the recommendation anymore, but I think
I,
they're they're blown past that, I think.
I was
So
going to say whatever the recommendation is, I tend to ignore it. I think, like I pointed out, it's when mine fall apart. But yeah, no, it's nice, and I like So they've got these shoes that seem to be really popular. So I've spent a fair amount of time looking at the site, and I thought, well, it might be nice to kind of profile that because, like I said,
yeah,
cool company, cool shoes, kind of fun.
nice. All right, good one.
Um,
There.
yeah. So where do you want to start? Should we start with like a
Hmm.
a collection page or a home page or product? What are you
That's a
feeling?
good idea. Would you do several or like a stepped kind of
We
thing?
could do that too. Yeah, I think let's do both. Let's start with like an initial landing, and then like that's a good point. Like this is a commerce shop, right? And so it's not really a question, I guess. And so there's
I
the
agree.
flow, right? Matters a lot. Like when we talk about measuring performance, we have a tendency to kind of zoom in on like single pages or single points in time. But
Yep.
really, if I'm Enda and I'm going to be doing anything in terms of like monitoring performance, and I want to make sure that I'm providing the best user experience possible, it's really the users are going to be coming and doing this. I'm going to be coming and looking at this page. I'm going to be like, oh, this shoe looks awesome.
Hmm.
That's really neat. I don't know, let me choose my size. Maybe I go to add it to my cart, and then go to the checkout. And this is the bit that really matters from the financial side of things, right? Is like not just that page, but this whole process to the point where like I've added something to the cart and I got to the checkout point. The more friction and the more time and the more work that comes in there, like that's where you're going to start to see if you're
Hmm.
not monitoring that flow, particularly that last bit, the add to cart and checkout,
Yeah.
you're
Hmm.
probably losing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you know, there are different performance considerations too beyond just the first view, right? So, often we run a test with a initial run and a repeat run to see how the caching
Mm-hmm.
is working, hopefully working well. That sort of thing you can test pretty practically with a multi-step kind of test, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's start first with, I guess, the individual page, kind of get a lay of the land, and then let's go ahead and use like scripting to go through the rest of the process.
All right.
So I'm going to kick off a page for, I guess this would be your PLP, your product listing page, I think is what they would like to call this in the ecom land. We'll do mobile. We could. Do we want to test from the US or do we want to test from Africa in this case?
That seems like I would imagine the audience would match for trying that
Let's
out.
do that.
That's great. Very nice that we're able to do that from different regions like that. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, and we haven't talked a lot about that on the Twitch stuff at all, but like I do think that's an important bit there. Like the fact that there's like getting that representative, when we talk about like representative connection and the browser type and all that stuff matters, but the geography is really important too. So
Yeah, and I would mention there too that in past client work that I recall doing. There's often this this idea of testing the audience that you already have. You know, we don't have any users on you know, mobile phones. They're all on desktop, so let's focus there. Or we don't really have any users outside of the US, something like that. Whereas, you know, maybe optimizing your site for those use cases that you don't currently have would enable people who are in those regions or on those devices to start using your product better, right? So being able to test around the world, even if you don't have a worldwide audience yet, probably a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it is. Actually, that's a really good point. I wonder if they're, I want to show something because I think it's kind of interesting. I think, or it could be kind of interesting. I guess I haven't actually looked for them. I'm going to grab, see, keep it off in a separate thing because I had a shortcut under a different browser profile. But I'm going to look at the Crux dashboard for their site really quick to see if they're in Crux. Because Crux, like what you just pointed out about like the things not, you know, maybe they're not showing up from a geography or a device as much because you haven't served that audience. I think Crux is actually a really, really interesting and obvious example of that sometimes. And so because the way Crux works, and there's a question here, by the way, from Sean, and Crux does, Chrome User Experience Report does break down by device and network. The dashboard doesn't do geography, but if you query the database directly, you can get a geographic breakdown. But this is where I think it gets interesting. Because Chrome User Experience is like this anonymized user experience data, right? Like, because they're collecting anonymized data through sessions. It's like a whole thing. There's a lot of stuff that happens to make sure that Crux, what they report data-wise, they're not doing anything that could potentially be a privacy risk. And one of those is there's like a threshold. There's this idea of like, if you don't have enough traffic from any subset of the audience. So let's say that your traffic in China or your traffic in Africa is below whatever this threshold is of users, they just won't report it. So it'll be completely non-existent. And that goes for connection as well. And so what I often see.
And device types too?
Yeah, and device types too would be the same thing, right?
Yeah. So if I had my user agent set to Scott Jehl phone, whatever.
Scott Jehl phone might not pop.
Right. There would have to be a lot of those. And I think there's only one.
Yeah, if there's not enough users, right? Because the idea is if there's a small enough number, then, you know, that becomes a privacy risk because now, you know, you could start to splice and dice it. And I mean, security and privacy is a whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And this actually is a pretty good example, as it turns out, I think. Like, so when we look at Crux data, a lot of the time we see like big percentages for connection distribution of 4G, which is effectively the fastest that they're going to report because that's all the, you know, effective connection type standard supports. And then you see like these other percentages that look really, really small, and like 3.86% being 3G, and like even less than that, if anything, coming in, like there's nothing being reported as 2G or slow 2G here. This is an interesting example, I think, because you can see how they alternate. Like they have, it's pretty standard 95, 96, 97%. But then you have these 2 months where like nothing gets reported for 3G. So my guess is this is one of those examples where there's probably people on this slower connection speed. And maybe for whatever reason, it just not enough of those sessions are getting recorded. And so if you're looking at your data and not like aware of how that's coming across, you may think, oh, we don't have any 3G users, but like, it's probably that there's a decent chunk. It's just like they alternate between like not having enough sessions from that network to be reported. So it doesn't show up in your analytics. So you think, well, I can kind of ignore it, but it's actually, they're there. It's just, and maybe if you improve the experience for them, you'd get more there too. So anyway, it's just, I think, an interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Anyway,
interesting when you have sort of public analytics, like different considerations.
For sure. Anyway, that was a nice little site. I like that though. It's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the result we've got for the Enda site.
All right, so we're on 4G.
Yeah, so I ran it on 4G here. Out of Cape Town, it's the only node that we had in Africa, and an emulated G4.
Okay. Might be worth kicking off another round from somewhere else,
Sure.
just to see, maybe there are CDN differences. Maybe they're hosted somewhere other than Kenya. I'm not sure, but
yeah, that's a valid point.
Interesting to see the timing.
Yeah, let's run one from the US. You would think, between the two different, at least you'd have, if there is going to be a CDN issue, I suspect it's likely will surface it that way. So yeah, it's a good point. Okay. Right. So yeah, and if we look down, I think we see that like our test result is a little bit more negative for this page than their 75th percentile of Crux data is. But again, I'm always more worried about, they still do look like they have some room for improvement on the largest contentful paint in the wild. I'm always more concerned when it's like the opposite. Like if our results are too good, that to me is the real problem.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So yeah, pretty high observed LCP here, at least.
Yep. Right.
Okay.
And then blocking time is pretty high. And then that CLS is right, and that needs improvement, which looks like they're right on the edge for this URL at least.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
So let's jump to run 2 and let's dive right into the film strip. There's a lot of red here. We'll get to that in a second. I think. Wonder if we also may have timed that interestingly. What do we got here? Oh no, so red is 404, right? So these are all 404 errors, like resource not found.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and sure enough, it just doesn't, it's not.
Shopify site.
Yeah, it looks like it's a Shopify site.
Which I've found with past clients often means there are sometimes quick ways to improve your performance, because there's like that whole ecosystem of Shopify plugins that
yes,
you can, pretty quickly apply a fix. So yeah. So it looks like a bunch of 404s, but what were our initial timings? Time to first byte was not too bad.
No, time to first byte wasn't bad. We're okay there. Our bigger issues were around, we did have a bit of a gap. So I'm going to hop back to the summary for a second here. We did have a little bit of a gap between that time to first byte and start render. Usually an indication that we've got render blocking resources. And then we definitely had a gap between largest contentful paint and when we get that first contentful paint.
Pretty big one there. That suggests maybe images are either served from JavaScript or they're too large.
Right. Yeah. That's usually, you're right. That's a solid point. If there's that big of a gap, there's probably something like that factoring in. So let's look at the start render delay, I guess, first. So there are a couple blocking resources, right? We've got the CSS, which is always going to be blocking unless you're getting super creative with it. I think we talked about that on a previous episode, or one of the, approaches you had to that you'd come up with.
Yeah, well, I think they're just looking at this, even at a glance. I mean, one of the blocking CSS files is a fonts file. Maybe that one could move its font declarations into the into the HTML and reach out to the fonts a little sooner without that double.
That's a good point.
Chained up.
Yeah, I mean, it is small. Look at that.
Yeah, just drop that right into the head of the page in a style element, and
yeah,
that would be at least one of them. But they're all in the same domain, right? So we're kind of
they're all off of cdn.shopify. So you're still going to have to make the request, and it's not like the connection time. It's not like the request itself is super long in that one, but it's still a little bit, right? Like drop that in the head. I think you're right. Actually, all their CSS is pretty small. Like this is what.
Yeah.
This is color stuff, pretty small.
Could use some. Well, it's so small anyway. Doesn't really need to be.
And then
much, but
theme itself. Okay, that's pretty typical. But yeah, you could roll. You could easily roll, the colors or fonts parts either into the theme for that single request or inline in the page and get those, eliminate a couple there.
Is there compression on that? I am looking.
Yeah, there is. So we do have this
Okay.
right here. You can see the uncompressed size compared to the bytes in.
So that's good.
So
Yep.
yeah,
Okay.
we're good there. I think a Google Tag Manager does not look like it looks like it's being loaded probably asynchronously. Chrome's reporting a potentially blocking status, which means that that's usually async. That's like if it arrives before we get something out onto the screen. Like the way let me back up. The way async scripts work is as soon as they arrive, then they get executed. So they're downloaded sort of in the background. They don't block during the download phase, but the execution phase they do. So if they arrive before you get something painted onto the screen, well, then the execution has to fire and it's blocking. If they arrive after you get something out on the screen, then it didn't technically block. Like it'll execute, but you've already got something on the screen. So that's why it's a potentially blocking.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. But that next script,
this one,
yeah, that looks problematic.
Yeah, it does. And this one is pulling, this one's long. We've got a long connection time up front there.
Yeah. So another domain.
Yeah, a separate domain. And yeah, it's not like massively big file, but yes, all that cost right there. And that is loaded in a blocking manner. So you can see there's that tiny little sliver of pink here, that bit of JavaScript execution before we ever get anything painted off here too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, one thing that we could do there is kick off a couple tests just to test impact of that.
Mm-hmm. Such as blocking it, maybe?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back. This is run 1. I'm going to go back to the waterfall view because there's a little bit of a shortcut on this view. We could add it to the film strip view. We should make a note of that.
Mm-hmm.
But in here, what I can do is we can block the request. We'll just block the URL. It doesn't matter too much, I suppose. And this is Cozy Country. And we'll run that. This is doing, like, you can do this the other way to do this is, if you're on the home page, there's the ability to block under advanced settings where you could drop in a URL or a domain. So there's a couple different ways to fire a test like this off. But what this is going to do is this will let us run the page, have that URL block it from being loaded entirely so that we can see, like, with that out of the way, does that make any improvement for us?
And in theory, unless that tag manager is blocking,
right,
it could save a couple seconds, right?
Yeah, right. This is where the race is going to come in, and this is why it's good to test this kind of thing. I'm going to close this off for a bit. If, to your point with that, to your point with that async one, it's going to be a little bit of a race between the browser, like how quickly it gets that CSS down to where it can, like, parse through the CSS and get to the rendering stage. And can it get there before Google Tag Manager arrives? And if it does, then you're right. Like, we could potentially shift that render quite a bit earlier. If it doesn't, then it might be one of those situations where, like, if we can't complete the actual style calculation part of the process, maybe we only gain a little bit of time here. And it's probably one of those that's going to be, like, depending, because it's a race condition, sometimes it's going to be a bigger improvement than others, like even in the real world, I would imagine, on this one.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So yeah, that could potentially impact the gap between first byte and start render. Right?
Yeah. So this is the result of that one with it blocked, came back. So we went from we got about a 1.1 second gap. And here we had about a 2 second gap.
Could drop that in the film strip, maybe.
That's a good call. So I'm going to go to my test history. We'll actually take 2 views of this. We'll select the 2 of them. We can compare. That'll hop to our film strip. We can also plot, which we only did 3 runs, so it's not the most exciting, but it's just to show it off. So
yeah, look at that.
Yeah, so our film strip, definitely out a lot earlier onto the screen, which is nice. And that's with similar time to first bytes, nearly identical, actually, which is nice.
Nice. So yeah,
look at that. Almost identical.
Right. Yep. So the next thing to know, I guess, is how important it is for that script to block, right? And if it could be deferred, maybe just add a defer attribute, and they'd save a second or more on initial render. So that's great.
Yeah, and it is a vendor script, so yeah, you have to look at the docs, talk to the vendor. Although there may be, in my experience at least, like sometimes the vendors are aware that they can be deferred. Other times it's like a thing where they're trying to just get themselves to fire earlier, and that's where you may want to run your own experiments too. To your point, like if you can defer it, even if it's not in the docs, or even if the vendor doesn't think it's possible, sometimes you can.
Yeah.
So, but there's a nice little improvement there.
Yeah, cool. That's a good one.
And then if we look at the plotting this is one of the things I like to do for like the variability. Let's see which test we had for the. So the one ending with 6 was our blocks. So we're going to compare it to the original test. And I'm just going to force vertical access to 0 just because for me, it's at least a little easier to see. But what this will do is this plots the results of each run. And so in this case, it was very consistent. Like when we had the stuff blocked, it was significant. It was statistically significant in terms of how much faster it was, and it was consistent too. There wasn't like a situation where it was ever slower. For this change, I wouldn't expect it to. It's just sometimes there are changes that introduce like a high level of variability in the results, and that doesn't seem like that's a case here. So
yeah, nice. Yeah. That's a nifty little view that I don't know. I think it probably doesn't get a lot of use, but
no, and we hit it, to be fair. It was never very prominent. I think we only recently, like in the last couple of weeks, put it here on this. So I'm not going to plot all that. But we only recently put it on this from the test history to make it a little easier. Yeah, nice. So that's a nice improvement.
Yeah, great.
Let's go back to our original test on this one. And we can look at the film strip again. I probably have this open in another page, don't I? Yeah, I do. This is me and my tabs, man.
So you start to look at that LCP?
Yeah, the LCP would be the next thing here.
Yes.
So actually, let's go back to the actual result then for LCP, because we've got that Core Web Vitals shortcut that'll make that a little easier. So just to review, we've got, in this case, at least a good 10-second gap. Now, in the real world, it doesn't look like the gap is as high, certainly not 10 seconds, but you can see that they are in that needs improvement range, and there is a good 1.7-second gap. So it's not like there is a gap that occurs here. So if we click on that and come through, in this case, it's firing on actually this div, this little text change up here.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Which looks like it's a dynamic thing for folk. If you can read that, heads up. If you're outside of the US and Canada, shop from the Kenya store for better shipping rates. So there's like potentially a dynamic message that's triggering LCP here.
Okay. Yeah.
Which probably explains the gap.
Yeah.
Like at least the 10 seconds versus 1.7.
Is that 2 jumps we're looking at?
In terms of this shifting?
Yeah, I wonder, is this, is it playing different ads like in rotation, or is it, I guess those are steps early, right?
I think it's steps.
Yeah.
Actually, let's see if
they're pretty close together. Yeah.
We had a little bit of a shift happen, right? And yeah, I think it's a step thing. So we can see like the little bit of shift we saw was from, not really ads. It's just kind of popping in that dynamic message sort of after the fact.
Right. Good example.
So in this case, it's about holding space. Yeah. So in this case, it's about holding the space for that div. But this also, this is again a good point of why, like, understanding the difference between why we might see some results that we do synthetically versus real user. If we're reporting 12-second LCP, the real user monitoring that Crux is seeing is 2.7, but that message itself might not, that's only going to show for this version of the site, for one, like not from the version that would be targeted at the local audience. it looks like. And the other thing is, that's one of those things that may or may not, depending on when it comes in, or if something doesn't pop in, and sometimes like that's maybe why we sometimes see a faster LCP, because if that message isn't there, then it's one of those images.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we could, did you dig into what maybe it is a script that's loading a little later that triggers that
text?
Yeah.
It did not yet. So let's look. All right, we've got a div here. Let's see, this waterfall truncates at the point where LCP fires. So it would be presumably something happening close-ish to that event. Probably some bit of JavaScript execution or something, or a request that completes with data. There is a little bit of JavaScript execution here. In fact, this might be it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So there's this, Yotpo is, I think that's a personalization thing, right? Familiar with them?
No, that's a new one to me.
Integrated experience for collecting and displaying UGC. Customer reviews, visual marketing, potentially.
Yeah.
So if you look at the waterfall, the reason why I zeroed in on that one is, let's see if we can get to the
LCP line.
Yeah, the LCP line is right at the end here of the waterfall, and this is the tiniest little bit. Like you can barely see it because it's not like a super long execution, but we have some script execution from that script right before LCP, and then we also have some but it looks like from this one,
just Uno.
Yeah, but that one looks like it's just right at LCP, like maybe right after. So my guess is it is this yacht pole thing doing something.
Yeah.
So this is one of those situations where maybe, if that is the case, maybe pulling back a third-party script that late. This is one of those rare cases where maybe we want to bump the third-party script up a little higher, or
yeah,
do
well,
something
it's
else
interesting.
there.
Like what kicks off the request to that script? Is it triggered by another script? Is it?
It is triggered by a loader, another loader from CDN Loyalty.
Yotpo.
Yotpo again. So now we're further up. That would be this one, looks like.
All right.
And that one looks like it's actually pulled in.
Okay. But that was requested pretty late. So maybe that could move up in the source.
Right. Yeah, that would be an idea. We talked a little bit about priority hints, I think, last week, but it might be an interesting solution there, because you probably don't want it blocking display of your page necessarily, but you want a little higher. So I wonder if this is one of those situations where you could load it deferred like this, but then give it a priority hint to tell it to come in a little bit earlier on the network at least.
Yeah.
And get that head start, or yeah.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, but yeah, that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Interesting to see an LCP that's not just a hero image.
Yeah, it's always the hero image, right? It's a little, yeah. There's actually a question in here, like identifying the LCP element in the waterfall when it's text. In the waterfall, that's trickier, right? Like, because it's not an actual individual request, like an image. So, like,
but we could show the element, right?
Yes.
In that other view.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if we're in the event summary, we can see the element itself. So we can see the div, we can see a little bit of the outer HTML. Sometimes there's going to be a hint in here. Like often if it's dynamically injected, there's some sort of a signal in an attribute somewhere where that came from. Yep. Didn't really seem to be the case here, which is why then we had to kind of dive in and say, okay, right before LCP fires, which is the end of this truncated waterfall, like what happens? Is there a request that comes back right before that? Maybe it's like an API response with some content, or is there some JavaScript execution, which is often the case. And then that's kind of your clue that, okay, that's probably triggered by that thing that occurred. But it is a little bit more, it's definitely not as straightforward as like, oh, it's this image, boom.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Anything else to look at here?
I think,
A multi-step. I was going to say, we mentioned a multi-step test.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Let's do that because I don't want to. I think that's kind of fun. It is kind of fun, and I don't want to necessarily lose that here. So let's do that. So we're going to go through a flow. We'll start with this collection, and then we'll kind of go to an individual product. We'll add it to the cart and then check out. So the first thing we'll be dropping that URL here. Making sure we've got our usual test settings and stuff is all fine. I'm just going to do multi-step here.
Should we do 3 runs again or just 1 for?
Yeah, we could bring it down to 1 just for, expediting the results a little bit, I think would make sense.
I agree. All right.
Okay. So the first thing we got to do is, so we're going to have to do this inside of script. This would be the custom scripting functionality that WebPageTest has to do flows or things like that. The first thing is just going to be to navigate to that page. I could drop the URL in. We also have this sort of pass-through variable we could use that says grab the URL that's up here and substitute it for this.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. So the next thing we need to do is get from this page to an individual product. So
you need a selector of some sort.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to find a selector that's unique, or at least gets us to one of these links. So what I'm going to do is inspect the source. I tend to test these out like as I'm doing it in the console. If it works in the console, it's going to work in our script.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just for now. If we can just grab that first image, maybe the first product. We could grab any that we wanted, but I think this works fine. For links, href works really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
So if we did console, let's see. My console is all full of stuff. So if we did a document.query selector, we'll do A and then drop that href in there. Pull that size up a little bit just to make it a little easier too.
All right. Yeah, that looks good.
I missed my closing there. Okay, so now we get a preview. This is why I like doing it in the console too, because it'll automatically highlight the element right away so I can see, yep, that's the one I wanted. I can see that I got the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to have to fire a click event on it. So I'm going to copy that, assuming this works, and then hit enter just to make sure it does what I wanted it to. And that looks about right.
Nice.
So right. We'll go back to our script and we'll add an execute and wait. And just drop that right in.
Slick.
Yeah, sorry about that. I realized partly through demoing this that it's a little bit of a tease. Stay tuned for, stay tuned.
Got that admin flag on.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get something on. Yeah, my bad. Anyway, so let's go back to our. Is this where no, that was my output thing that confused me. Okay, so now we're on this page. So now we should be at this step. Our next thing is going to be to add one to the cart. Depending if we wanted to do this, like you could go ahead and choose like a different size. I think since we just want to measure the flow in this case, I don't know. We could probably just add to cart directly, and yeah. So we'll just look at this button, and yeah, the ID looks like an option, or the name too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the ID. The only thing that's throwing me on the ID is this big number makes me nervous.
Yeah,
like, I'm not sure if that's
generated.
like a dynamic thing.
Okay.
So let's try this. And then let's do the exact same thing. Document.query selector. And we're going to grab a button with a name of add.
Looks good.
Looking good. And then click.
Love those little previews that you get in DevTools.
I do. The previews are so nice. So if I click through that, great. Now we get a little checkout thing. So let's go back. Oh, go away. No, thanks. I'm set. I think we can ignore that. We could probably find a cookie to ignore that actually, but we'll just for now, for simplicity, leave it out of there.
And you need a exec and wait on there as well?
Yes, I do. Good call. I would have run this test and then been like, why isn't this working? We could space this out just for readability too.
Yeah. And if you're interested in these scripting options, all these various commands you can write are over in the docs.
Yeah, on the custom scripting right there in front of me. I was looking for it.
Yeah, all right there. Lots you can do.
Yeah, there's quite a bit that can actually, we use scripting for things like advanced Firefox preferences and all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah, very cool.
Okay, so now we're here. So now the last thing we need to do is check out. So let's grab this one and we'll do the same. We'll just use that name attribute again and then do documents.query selector.
Good naming on this site. Everything's very clear.
It is not always this easy to grab especially when you're getting into some of the stuff where it's like, Angular, React, or whatever, Angular in particular, like, and these forms can be driven by that. Then you have to get into like, sometimes it's funky. Like, where does the click need to be fired from? Or is it the right event even? Yeah, this is nice.
Right. Yeah. Class names with timestamps and sorts of things.
This is so much easier. That's the part I'm curious about, because that transition there seems to take a little bit. So we'll grab that. So now we know the script worked in the browser. We've got our commands here. We're only doing the one test. Let's fire it off.
All right.
I can zoom out. Zooming in flexes that responsive chop, though. I do like that.
Yeah. And in my opinion, it highlights things that I need to fix.
There is that too. Yeah. That's nice. It's a good stress test. Yeah.
Yeah. It's usability was the first aim.
Exactly. It's a good step in the right direction for that.
All right. So we've got a multi-step kicked off.
Yeah. Now this might take a little bit, right? Because even though we're only doing the one test run, it's going to be a lot more involved, right? It's going to have to load the page. It's going to wait till the page loads. Then it's going to exec the JavaScript, wait until any related activity concludes, then keep kind of moving through. But yeah, now this time at least we get to see that entire flow. And so what we're hoping for here is like, it's one thing to land directly on a product page. It's another thing to land directly on a checkout page. But like that actual process in real life, the way users are going to go through it is those interactions in between. And then, you want to check and make sure there's not a significant gap or unnecessary friction.
Yeah. And it's the sort of thing that you could run periodically to check how that particular flow is performing.
Right.
Which seems pretty useful, especially coming into holiday seasons, things like that. So.
Oh yeah. And I've definitely worked, when I was doing consulting and stuff, I definitely worked with a few orgs who that was like the specific problem they'd have is they'd see a big drop off when people would go, they'd get to the point where they had added something to the cart, but then going to the checkout, there was a big drop off. And if they were monitoring the pages individually, it looked okay. But when they looked at those two, like that actual flow from I've added to jumping to my checkout cart, like then it became apparent that there was some performance issues. And when you clean those up, you were fine. But yeah.
Here we go.
Woohoo. All right. So it breaks it out by step. Now there's a couple of things to note about the steps. It's not so bad here because most of these are distinct. I'll see, we probably should have cleared that order thing and see it popped its head up a little bit, but oh well. It still gets the actual working that's happening behind the scenes to get to our checkout process.
Yeah, but it would have been pretty realistic to have to close a dialogue.
True. Yeah, maybe shouldn't have stopped that over, or at least added a cookie or something to clean that up. But hindsight 2020. The other thing is on these steps, if it's a step that does not trigger another page navigation, you're not going to get metrics like, largest contentful paint and stuff like that, because those are based on, page navs. So we have like the one where we added to a cart that brought that sidebar in. That's not a page nav, which is why we're not going to see any sort of, LCP for that step or anything like that.
Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, so now you've got the step results. So what's nice is we've got the waterfall for each. We already kind of saw that initial landing page, But now we're starting to see the impact of, caching from one page to another. Like we jumped from collections to the PDP. Now we're seeing a lot of that probably, thankfully, was cached, I guess, from the collection stuff. But now you still have all these other requests. Most of them looks like little third-party things are hopping off to the cart quite a bit, actually, off to the cart here.
That's true.
A lot of little JSON connections there.
Almost
then
looks
I
like
think
a polling kind of thing.
Yeah. And this would be this is when we added to the cart. We could have named these too, by the way. I did not do that in the script, but we could have used set event name and then say, PDP or set event name at the cart, which would have just made it a little easier to distinguish which these steps are. But
yeah. Have you seen clients add, say, a delay to sort of mimic how long it would take to even find that button to click, to sort of like
good question.
Because
I haven't seen many do it, but
right. It's the fastest a robot can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's also a really good point. We're kind of it's going to be jumping around pretty darn fast because it's going to find that it's not like the delay in sort of looking through the page or anything like that. I think there's probably a point where you have to, and I'm not sure, and the answer is probably different for different sites and situations, but there's probably a point where you have to get to a point where it's realistic enough and accept that there's going to be some misses, right? It's not going to perfectly mimic the real user experience, but
I guess it's also about how you're communicating this. Like if it's something where you're saying it takes 5 seconds to reach our site and check out for the average user, you probably wouldn't want to rely on the test like this for that kind of statement.
Yeah, that's a really good point too.
But it's really good for testing every pull request and make sure you don't regress or that kind of thing.
So. No, that's a really good point. And I do see for what it's worth, this last step, which was the one that I was a little curious about, which is I've added to cart and now we went and clicked through to the checkout. That is a little bit of a lengthy process. We have this all kind of fires before we ever get to, in this case, this is our actual checkout page. So we've got some delay there, just tracking and beaconing and stuff going on. That's adding a fair amount of time. And then we're making requests there are some JavaScript files that are related to the checkout and style sheet and stuff that we haven't used before. One of them's pretty big. This JavaScript file is, 250K. And those are all done in a blocking way. And you can see so then the loading of that's going to delay that checkout page coming in. And the other thing is we have this pink bar, which is sort of that DOM content loaded, any activity related to that. That's where jQuery would trigger a lot of work typically. So there is a fair amount of stuff that's happening in that transition period that, and I don't know if this is an issue for them or not, but if there is an issue where there's potentially some drop off here, it'd be worth, zeroing in on all this activity, basically lines 1 through maybe 1920 or
are we using a tracking service that we don't need to use anymore?
Or can can we do some pre-fetching for some of these checkout things? If I've added to cart, if there's a pretty strong likelihood that I then check out, could I at that point where I'm adding to cart maybe pre-fetch some of these scripts or style sheets to get those in cache too, so I'm not waiting for the request? Also
looks like a pre-order now domain makes an appearance here that maybe could be at least pre-connected on the prior
you're right,
because it's pretty costly there.
No, that's a good point. That's another 350. That's almost 700 milliseconds or so to do the connection TCP and LCP there. So pre-connecting off to that might be another option. That's a really good point. Or you could also pre-connecting, and those are where we can get dynamic. We talk about those have to be in the head, or you could use headers, but you can dynamically inject pre-connects, preloads, pre-fetches. So again, at that add to cart, fire off a couple pre-connects to that, or maybe some of these key pay services, which it looks like we might be doing DNS resolution for upfront. Like pre-connecting to these might help. Because you can see the DNS resolution, the little teal happening, but a full-blown pre-connect should also do our TCP connection and SSL negotiation. And for those key payment services, that might be a nice thing to speed those up too. So there's, closing the gap here a little bit. Yeah, that would be, there looks like there's some opportunity here to make that a little less friction.
Yeah, definitely those third parties especially.
Yeah. Nice.
Cool.
So that's the scripting stuff. I think that, about where we are in terms of time and stuff, but the scripting thing is fun. I like digging into that.
Yeah, that's nice. We looked at that site from a few different angles, and it seems like, they're already in pretty good shape, but
yeah, they're right. Their core web vitals looked pretty solid in terms of what we were seeing there. I think they've got a pretty solid foundation to build on too. It's not like there is nothing that I saw. Sometimes you look at a site and you're like, this is going to require quite a bit of like re-architecture to get there. I don't think that's the case here. Like, I think we saw there's probably just a couple things here and there that if they make those improvements on, can get them some really big wins without having to do a full-blown re-architecture or anything like that.
Right. Yeah.
Nice.
Just little steps. Cool.
Yeah, I like those. Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. Nice chat with you. I mean, we could do the wetsuit thing next time, maybe.
Yeah. I'll ship it to you. I don't know. It should take less than a week. And
okay. I appreciate that. Yeah. That would be good. Yeah. We could I wonder if we could get WebPageTest branded wetsuits. Just the next team photo is all of us in WebPageTest wetsuits. That's a terrible
I'll let you try it on first, and thanks, maybe we can all order them. Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan. All right, thanks, man, and thanks everybody who kind of tuned in. We'll be back in another 2 weeks. As always, if there are things you want to look into, let us know.
All right, see you later, Tim.
Thanks,